There's often a disconnect between the tool you want to use and the ability to connect it with AI.
AI really becomes beneficial is when it gets integrated into workflows.
Part of where we are in the cycle now, too, is around AI being a bit more generic and moving towards being more specific.
I think AI can be pretty effective at that. Now, what AI can't do is tell you.
You are listening to the AI with Maribel Lopez podcast, or AI with ML. If this is your first time listening, thank you for joining. The AI with Maribel Lopez podcast is brought to you by the Data for Betterment Foundation. This podcast shares the stories of the people behind the new world of data and AI. What are they creating, and why does it matter? If you like this episode, please subscribe so you can easily find the podcast again. You can find the video version of this podcast at youtube.com at AI with Maribel Lopez. You can also share your feedback and ideas with me on X, also known as Twitter, and LinkedIn. All links are in the show notes. Extended show notes, episodes, and transcripts can be found at lopezresearch.com/podcast. I hope you'll enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to the AI with Maribel Lopez program. I'm excited to be back here. As always, we're talking to interesting people about how AI is changing industries across the globe. And today I'll be speaking with Tim Marklein, who is the CEO of Big Valley Marketing. Big Valley Marketing is an award-winning consulting firm that helps technology companies grow and win in the market. It's an 11-year-old firm that works with leaders and change agents across a wide spectrum, software, infrastructure, AI, cybersecurity, digital health, and supply chain markets. So pretty broad coverage. And I'm excited to talk to him today about what's happening with marketing and communications. Tim, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about the change because I think I spend a lot of time talking to technologists, and we talk about the technology change and what it means for IT. But we also have a whole side of the business where we talk about customer experience and marketing. And I realized we hadn't done a lot of episodes on that. So I thought maybe we could kick off by talking about, from your perspective, how do you see how AI has changed the way marketing and communications professionals develop and pitch stories, brands engage with customers? Does it differ if, say, it's a media person or a technology industry analyst?
Great question.
There's four questions, but we like to do that.
I'll start with, I don't know, as part of the research that we've been doing, but also in just tracking what's going on in the market. I think depending on what survey you look at, you'll hear, AI is changing everything in marketing communications, and others where people will say they're not using it really at all or not using it much. I think the dirty truth behind that is okay, everybody has played around with ChatGPT and Perplexity and Claude and kind of other tools that they're using in various ways. Or maybe they played around with AI in the context of, other tools like Zoom or Grammarly or other tools where AI is kind of embedded into some sort of workflow. But I kind of feel like just across the board, what I see outside of what people say in surveys, the reality of what people are doing is it feels like it's still across the board. People are dabbling in it, that it's not really fully integrated to the workflow, that it's kind of an accent piece. And some of that is because it's new, or large language models and generative AI is new. I mean, the other forms of AI have been around for a while. So some of it is new. Some of it is, I think when it really becomes valuable, it's when it's embedded in a workflow and you might not even know that you're using AI, but AI is impacting some sort of something else. And so I think it's just all across the map in terms of the level of adoption or where people are using it. The three areas that we see a lot of traction ourselves is kind of, I like to call it search alternative, where people are kind of using AI as an alternative to search. And I think Perplexity and others are leaning more into that direction. And there's a lot of power there. Hey, tell me what's going on here, or tell me what's going on there, or give me some insight about what people are talking about. So kind of a search alternative. I think the second piece where we're seeing a lot and we're using a lot is kind of analysis, or specifically pattern analysis, where I think AI can be particularly useful for marketing and communications to be able to say, if we were working with a client that wants to engage with you, like, hey, what does Maribel think about this? Or tell me what Maribel's been writing about, or summarize the interviews and like, what are the 3 themes that are coming through in the interviews? Like AI is really pretty good at doing that. Um, and then the third piece I would say is writing or editing assistance, where I think AI can be useful in like, hey, we've written this and maybe it's overly technical and we want to make it, in more everyday language, or we need to take this 10-page white paper and boil it down into into a 2-paragraph response for an RFP. AI is really good at that, where AI is not good at all. And I think to both the focus of our research and kind of what we've been advising clients is, the original thinking that is particularly valuable especially in a B2B technology context, where, if you're a buyer of a product, you want to know, well, what does the company think? What are their beliefs? What are their points of view about how this technology or how these things should work? And, you can't go ask AI for that. You have to go ask people for that and curate that. And so I think there increasingly will be a premium on original thinking. And as much as, there's going to be AI adoption for the lower end of the curve, I think investing as much on the original thinking at the higher end of the curve is going to be really important moving forward.
I really like where you're going with this, because it's something I've been thinking about for a while. I see a lot of demos of technology, and it's always like, click, say you want this and click a button and this amazing social media campaign is going to come out, or this amazing set of charts is magically going to appear. By the way, I've tried that and it doesn't actually turn out as you had hoped. But having said that, one of the things that really struck me when I was thinking about this is, well, if everybody starts using AI, does everybody's brand positioning and marketing and social content all start to look the same, because it just becomes one interesting reinforcement loop? And in some ways, I can see how the answer might be a little different for consumer versus business. It's still a concern for both of them, but in B2B, it can be very specific, the differences in the technology. Whereas maybe soap, it's like, okay, this one's got a perfume and this one's got a colored box. And, there's some differences, but you can see how maybe you're getting closer. But I think actually in general, what you're talking about for both B2B and B2C is very relevant. Like, what is your brand? How do you talk about your brand? How do you create the uniqueness of it? And you can't ask AI to create the uniqueness of your brand. You can ask them to help clarify what's going on. But there's a lot of discussion around that.
Well, and an example of that would be, in cybersecurity, for example, you can use AI pretty well to be able to find out, well, what are the top 3 concerns that people have, or why they would use a password manager, or what are the top 5 things that they're looking for in terms of threat intelligence. Like, that is generic enough where, okay, OpenAI, any AI tool kind of looking at what people have said about those things, you can curate that pretty well. But I don't know, I would think most customers of the types of clients that we're working with from a B2B tech standpoint or a cybersecurity standpoint in this case would want to know, well, what are the threats that Company X is seeing on the front lines, and what are they learning from all of those interactions with customers and the threat intelligence? And that, like, AI could be applied to curate that, but the data sets aren't of it. Like, it has to be, there's experience and there's insight there that I think is more valuable than what an AI generated response could do. And again, it does also depend on what types of content you're creating. If you're just trying to create very like simple SEO content, historically has been used in a way where it's like, oh, let's go research what people say about those things. And there's no company point of view in that. There's no direct insight in that. But, the higher value things are, you really want to know, well, what is the perspective of that company based on all of the experience and all of the frontline work that they're doing? What do they think, and what should matter based on all of that? Like, AI can't replace that. AI could augment that at some point, but right now you can't even do that.
I want to go back and dig into something that you were talking about a minute ago, and maybe take it from a slightly different angle. And that's to talk about how AI, or is AI capable of helping organizations target audiences or better segment markets, or what are you actually seeing as the opportunity there? Because back to AI is a magic bullet that can do everything. I believe it can do a lot. there's a time phase around when different things happen, but are you starting to see that as a reality for brands, or what would be a reasonable reality and expectation today?
Yeah, we are seeing that. It's let's say you're a startup in you know, supply chain software. Um, you could use AI to be able to go do a lot of really good audience research, heavily curating things that are available publicly, or even looking at, hey, let me go take the latest 50 analyst reports in a space and let me go assess that, distill that down to what are the three themes, the five themes that are coming through. I think, you know, I don't think there's a substitute. I mean, I think there's still, you need to read some of those things and there's learning that needs to happen outside of the AI curation, if you will, there. But I think AI can be pretty effective at that. Now, what AI can't do is tell you, should you be targeting the head of supply chain, or should you be targeting the transportation leader, or should you be targeting the logistics manager, or, that prioritizing which of those you can figure out the care abouts for each of those audiences, maybe if there's enough that's been published where you can kind of learn that, but how you should prioritize that. What is the strategy of how to go engage those people? How does that relate to what you do as a company? And how will that be different than all of the other companies that are out there? I think AI can be a feeder into that, but that's where the human management, the human insight and ingenuity is going to be really critical. And yeah, if you can combine those two, that's great. But I generally feel like this is where, to an earlier point that you made about technologists, really having a lot of technologists on about talking about AI use. I think sometimes the technologists think, oh, we can and should use AI for all of these things. But I think if you bring the business perspective in or the marketing and communications perspective in, well, what is an appropriate use of AI? In some cases, it's going to be very different than what the technologist would try to tell you.
I absolutely agree with that. And I think one of the things that's exciting about AI is that you don't necessarily have to be a technologist to use it now. So some
Yeah.
of that disconnect between IT and business leads, we can bridge in a better way. I still think that doesn't mean we get to replace IT. IT is still going to have to help
Yeah.
you connect the various data sources, and there are definitely technical and security aspects that have to be dealt with. But we can at least start to get to things that say, okay, maybe I will, try to figure out how to do like a code assist to do something obscure that might have been priority 50 on the IT's list, right?
Yeah.
So that's one good thing. Now, okay, so you run a business, and I'm curious as to how you're thinking about current or emerging AI capabilities. What excites you? What are you thinking about incorporating into your company's workflows?
Well, workflow is probably the key word there for me. I think where the AI really becomes beneficial is when it gets integrated in the workflow. So while yes, we're using a number of generic AI tools or kind of broad AI tools, I think we're increasingly looking at, okay, where and how does this fit into the workflow of other things that we have? Now, the trick is that sometimes the AI that is being chosen or implemented within some of those workflow tools is suboptimal compared to other AI tools. So we do a lot of transcription, right? Tends to be good for transcription, but
Me too.
the level of transcription that we get across 5 different tools that we've used are, we use Zoom for calls. So, we tried Zoom, but we tried 5 other tools and like wildly different. Summary is wildly different, recaps of action items and how useful those are. And I don't know, right now it's in kind of that frustrating position where, oh yeah, the AI tools that we really would like to use aren't the ones that are necessarily integrated into the workflow or vice versa. And so how does that evolve over time? And I think for a company in our situation, like how do you mix and match those things becomes sometimes difficult. And I think being able to really think about it from a use case standpoint. So we're really looking at workflows and use cases, and for workflow X, we might use a particular tool. For use case Y, and we might use a different tool. The ones that are really motivating right now for us are heavy on the research and analysis and how we can go understand and distill things quickly in ways that don't substitute for the human knowledge and ingenuity, but can help us kind of learn something quickly about a new area and go dive in and then go figure out what we need to go help our clients do in that area.
You actually brought up something that we struggle with in our field as well. So there's often a disconnect between the tool you want to use and the ability to connect it with AI. The other thing that I think a lot of organizations, including mine, are struggling with is the pace of change. So there's always a new tool, and there's always wondering like, well, how do I decide what tool's best for what type of thing I'm doing? And that must actually also be something that you have in spades, right? Because you also have different clients with different needs. So this is it's a really exciting time though, because we've gone from AI being something that people didn't feel they could use to us having this dialogue about, well, there are all these tools and, some of them are better than others and, we're trusting them out for different things. So I think part of where we are in the cycle now too is around AI being a bit more generic and moving towards being more specific.
Yeah.
So as we get to that, specific to industries, specific to tasks,
Yeah.
some of that will, not all of it, but some of it will resolve itself. And reasoning coming up on the horizon is pretty interesting. Now, I know we've talked a lot in this industry at large, in marketing, communications, PR, can be very metric driven. Do you foresee that AI changes what we're doing with traditional metrics, or are there new metrics, or do they just make it easier for us to capture the information?
For the most part, I would say it makes it easier to capture the information. I mean, we talk a lot about objectives and KPIs. Obviously, we also talk a lot about value and impact. What value and impact are we having on the business, and all of that on our clients' businesses, and all of that comes down to really business outcomes and business objectives that then flow into marketing objectives and communications objectives. I don't think AI can really help there unless you're like an inexperienced marketer, an experienced business leader, and you're like, hey, we're getting into this new area, or we're doing, I don't know, brand strategy as an example. Like, how do you measure or evaluate brand? Like, if you don't have the knowledge, I think you could use AI to be able to curate that. But I don't think AI is going to tell you anything new about how you should measure brand growth, brand equity, brand value, or how you're tracking demand generation, or how you're tracking corporate reputation. I think those are kind of mostly immutable things that have been around for a while. And yeah, there's some new techniques or maybe some new methods that emerge from time to time. I think where AI can be helpful is there's some things that you can go do from a tracking and a how do you go instrument those things, where AI is going to be very, very helpful. And I think it doubles down on the workflow point. It's like, well, how does it piggyback with the systems of record and or the other data streams that you have to be able to go learn from those and, get out of the silos? I think AI can be helpful when plugged into that, but I think it's still going to require a lot of human ingenuity to be able to go architect that or manage that and then tie it back to the business objectives, and then go do the data storytelling around that beyond just like, oh yeah, here's the data, but like, why does this matter and what does this mean to the business?
I'm happy to hear that there's still a role for the human in all this. Every now and again, we lose the human. We have to bring the human back. I'm very excited about that.
We may go away at some point, but I think we've got a long runway ahead.
Yes. I hope so. It at least hopefully we'll make it through our lifetime before there's an actual Terminator going on. So we've laughed about that quite considerably. Yeah. It's interesting because you've spoken about workflow quite a bit, and I think that is so important. And I think what we're really trying to do, one of the more interesting things is to see how AI is being embedded into some of the existing applications, into your CRM applications, into supply chain applications. There's a wide range of how that's being implemented. But I had to laugh because the other force that we see happening in AI right now is a lot around agentic AI. And depending on who you speak with, and you must be dealing with this a lot with your client base, I've seen agentic AI be everything from it does something really small to it's going to fully automate a workflow for you, which can be flat out terrifying to enterprise buyers right now. But it's conceptually interesting, and I think it might start to impact marketing workflows moving forward. So that's a to be determined.
Yeah.
We talked a bit about metrics. One of the other things that seems to be a topic that comes up a lot is concerns about authenticity and ethics in AI. I'm going to leave that just broadly of, tell me what you're seeing and hearing and what you're advising your customers on, because it's a pretty dynamic and interesting space in terms of, creating that uniqueness of brand voice versus just creating a bunch of content and what data you use and everything else, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that gets to a little bit of the research that we did in the summer into fall, looking at, obviously there's been a lot of discussion about ethics, about responsible use of AI and everything else. And one of the things that struck me in having various conversations and being at a few conferences where we were talking about this was that there has been this discussion about disclosure, like when, do you disclose when you're using AI, how you're using AI, in marketing and communications, but also in product, and kind of looking at it kind of from both sides. What we found was there's kind of a presumption that people have about trust, that, hey, if we disclose that we're using AI to be able to go create this blog post, or we disclose that we're using AI in this product and here's how we're using it in this product, that disclosure or the transparency around that therefore breeds trust and, makes people feel like, hey, this is responsible use of AI. Now that works in an environment where people trust the prospect of disclosure. But in this case, based on some of the surveys that are out there, 80% of people don't trust AI. So disclosing that you're using AI actually makes people trust it less in the short term. So there are dynamics there that I think companies have to work through. And what we found is, or kind of where I lean into it is it's not just about responsible use of AI, it's about appropriate use of AI. And most of the guidelines that I think people have laid out around disclosure kind of lay out, well, more about how do you disclose AI and what do you disclose? And in that context of appropriate use and responsible use, the who and the how questions, or the who and the why questions, are more important, I think, in terms of building trust about AI use. So who is using AI? Oh, Maribel is using AI to be able to, and why? She's using it for this purpose. And like, oh yeah, she's using it to help her edit this post. Like, I think people would say, okay, well, I trust Maribel and she's using it for an appropriate use. And I know that Maribel's using it, so she's going to be responsible. But I think this is where companies tend to lean into more generic things. And so you don't know the who is using it. So, well, person X or person Y at that company might use it completely different ways, right? And look at all of the discussion that's happened around OpenAI and all of the board intrigue and everything else. Like, okay, well, who's using it depends on the day and depending on who's in the management structure and how they're organized and everything else. And those things do matter on the who, but I also think the why, if we're looking at it more generally, like, okay, if you're a company and you're using AI, like, I think technology marketing people need to be much more front and center on these issues and communicating, well, here's how we're using AI and why we're using it for these things to be able to build trust. And there's too much black boxing right now where it's just like, oh, it's in there, but like, what are the decisions being made? How is it being used? But also, why is it being used for that? I think starts to become much more important to building trust and kind of the responsibility of this. And I think marketing and communications leaders and business leaders generally, not just the technologists, need to step up on that front.
You actually recently did that report, Tim, so on disclosure and transparency. So I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes so that people can follow up and see what their research actually said. There's a lot of discussion about reskilling, upskilling as we move into an AI era. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, what skills do you believe professionals should be developing to remain relevant in this AI augmented industry?
Well, the easy answer that people have talked about is prompting, right? You need to become a prompt engineer. And like, I do think prompting like is a skill that people should develop, but I think 99% of people should not become prompt engineers.
It wasn't my first life goal to become a prompt engineer, truly. Yes. Yeah.
It's like, no, what is your job and how do you use prompting in service of that job, to me, is where it becomes more important. But I do feel like there's, to the skilling and reskilling, I think there's a lot of experimentation that really is important. Like, go play around with these various tools. Go, it might be a frustrating experience. It might be a great experience. It will change over time because they introduce a new version and now what worked doesn't work anymore. But I don't know, playing around with it. But then I think what we've seen in our team and with our clients is then think about, like, okay, after you've experimented for a little bit, where and how could this help you in your workflow, and maybe get past the, like, oh, it's a shiny new object. And, like, at a certain point, it's like, okay, you've got a job to do. So how does this shiny new object fit within the job to do? And, I think the hard part, given the pace of change and the technology innovation that's happening, is you can't, unlike other places where you could go, oh, I'm going to adopt this and use it for the next 2 or 3 years. Like, no, you need to, we're at a pace of change that is different. Like, yes, I don't need to change my iPhone every year or every 6 months. I can go 3 or 4 years and I'm going to be okay. But I think with what's happening on the innovation front with AI, you probably need to have more of a 6-month refresh cycle to just keep experimenting and playing around with things. And if you find something that works, use it, but then keep your eye out for some new things that are coming.
Yeah, the need to be curious in this age is really, and experimental is definitely a skill I think we all need to cultivate. I'm going to ask you to put your crystal ball hat on for a second. And let's talk about looking ahead, what you envision. How do you envision AI changing the marketing and communications landscape from where it is today? Is it just make it more productive? That's one answer. Or do you see anything else?
I think it's going to be herky-jerky. So over the course of time, I think it will make us more productive. Over the course of time, I think the analytical capability will be better. Over the course of time, it might be able to do more reasoning and help with some of those things. I think that over the course of time, it could also get more out of control. Over the course of time, it could take over functions that really require human intervention. I think there are cases we've seen where, you've got executives who are non-marketing executives who are using AI, and they go, oh, well, I can go write my LinkedIn post using some AI tool and kind of extrapolating from that. Oh, well, I don't need to pay for marketing. I have these AI tools. Well, no, there are skills involved in this that are really required. And, I think the skills and the experience, I think for all of us as practitioners, need to remind people about the skills and the experience that are being brought to the table. We've got, for example, on our team, we've got in our market intelligence practice, somebody who is just fantastic at AI research. And he is sharing all kinds of wonderful guidance and feedback and tool tips and everything else with our team. And it would be easy for somebody on the outside of that to say, like, oh, I can go use Perplexity to go do what this AI research specialist is doing. And yeah, you could, but he's bringing 25 years of experience and perspective to the table on how he's using it that is informing what he's doing. And, like, you can't just go give the same tool to somebody who doesn't have that experience and expect the same result. So to me, that, I guess, in a crystal ball sense, is like, how do we get back to that recognition of, like, it's the combination of the person and the tool is really where the magic happens, not one or the other.
I simply love that. I think that is the right answer, that it's the combination between the two. And hopefully over time, both get better, right?
Yeah.
The individual gets better at their role, and AI gets better at helping them in their role. So it could be this really nice cycle. Tim, thank you so much for your time, your attention, your thoughts on what's happening with marketing and communications. And I look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Sounds great. Thanks for the time. And it's been a fun conversation.
Let's see what happens next. Thank you for listening. Additional content can be found at lopezresearch.com/podcasts. Until next time, wishing you all the best.